In today's episode, we're looking at these campers who were dragged from their tents and killed during rare but catastrophic bear attacks from Tennessee's remote mountains to Wyoming's backcountry. But first, we start in Montana, where one man's camping trip would end in unimaginable horror. It was August 15th, 2016, in the Bob Marshall Wilderness of Montana, when Oscar Mills set up camp at a remote, dispersed site accessible only by a faint user trail. The location sat deep within one of America's most pristine wilderness areas, surrounded by towering peaks and dense forests that stretched unbroken for hundreds of thousands of acres. Ancient whitebark pines and Douglas firs created a canopy overhead, while the nearest road lay over 20 miles away through rugged mountain terrain. The area was renowned for its complete isolation from civilization and its thriving population of North America's largest and most powerful land predators. Oscar Mills was a 28-year-old outdoor gear reviewer who had built a modest following of 3,200 subscribers on his YouTube channel through increasingly reckless content. His personality was defined by arrogance and a dismissive attitude toward established safety protocols, believing his limited wilderness experience made him superior to conventional wisdom. He had ventured into this remote location specifically to film what he called the ultimate bear encounter video, content that would make him famous by proving he could interact with wild grizzlies like they were domesticated pets. Earlier that day, Oscar had encountered professional hikers on the trail who warned him about recent bear activity in the area and the importance of proper food storage. Seasonal hikers had specifically mentioned posted warnings about aggressive bear behavior near the trail junction. Both groups had emphasized the critical need for bear-proof containers and clean camping practices in this particular region. The campsite Oscar chose showed clear evidence of recent wildlife activity that he either ignored or deliberately sought out. Fresh claw marks scarred the bark of nearby whitebark pines at shoulder height, indicating recent bear presence. As evening approached, Oscar began implementing his catastrophically stupid plan to create viral content by deliberately attracting and befriending a wild grizzly bear. His insane scheme involved using food as bait to lure bears directly to his campsite. Oscar cooked bacon, sausages, and fish directly beside his tent, while filming himself calling out to any bears in the area, promising them a feast if they would come to be his co-star. He scattered trail mix, energy bars, and opened cans of tuna in a wide circle around his tent, creating what he called bear bait stations to ensure maximum attraction. Oscar had left multiple tent openings unsecured and stored food inside the shelter, significantly increasing scent dispersion and access. He filmed himself explaining how he would invite the bear inside his tent to share food and create the most amazing wildlife footage ever captured. His plan was to hand feed the bear while filming their friendship from inside the confined space of his tent. Grizzly bears possess an extraordinarily acute sense of smell, allowing them to detect food odors from great distances under favorable wind and terrain conditions. Adult males in the Bob Marshall Wilderness can exceed 600 pounds and possess incredible strength, able to flip over massive boulders and damage vehicles or thin metal structures with their claws. When attracted by strong food scents, these apex predators become intensely food-focused, forcefully investigating and removing whatever blocks access to the odor source, without distinguishing between gear, shelters, or people. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Oscar's tent-mounted action camera captured footage of a massive grizzly bear emerging from the tree line, drawn by the overwhelming concentration of food scents. The 600-pound male moved directly toward the tent, following the deliberate bait trail Oscar had created. As the bear approached, excited speech is audible on the recording moments before the audio degrades into wind noise and sudden impact sounds. The grizzly's investigation quickly escalated as it detected the food sources concentrated around and inside the modified tent. Oscar, in his delusional state, actually unzipped his tent opening and began calling to the bear, trying to coax it inside while holding out food. Investigators later noted that the recording captured only brief speech before abruptly cutting off, consistent consistent with sudden physical trauma and equipment disruption. The moment the bear entered the tent space, Oscar's fantasy of befriending a wild grizzly was shattered by brutal reality. The massive predator, focused entirely on the concentrated food sources, immediately pinned Oscar with its weight while biting and clawing at his upper body in a chaotic, close-range struggle. The massive teeth penetrated deep through clothing and flesh, crushing bone and severing major blood vessels. With terrifying ease, the 600-pound predator dragged Oscar completely from the tent into nearby dense brush. Once in the cover of the forest, the bear's feeding instincts engaged fully. It maintained its crushing grip while delivering additional devastating bites to Oscar's head, neck, and upper torso. The powerful jaws inflicted catastrophic head and neck trauma, while massive claws raked across his chest and abdomen, opening deep lacerations that exposed vital organs. Blood loss was immediate and catastrophic, as major arteries were severed by the bear's razor-sharp teeth. As Oscar sustained fatal traumatic injuries, the bear continued forceful biting and mauling behavior before disengaging and returning to the surrounding area. Oscar sustained catastrophic traumatic injuries that would have caused rapid loss of consciousness and death shortly thereafter, while the bear's feeding behavior continued. The grizzly remained in the area for an extended period, consuming the food Oscar had scattered as bait before eventually departing the undisturbed wilderness location. The recording devices captured the entire horrific sequence, providing investigators with clear evidence of how Oscar's deliberately reckless attempt to create viral content led directly to his death. Search and rescue teams discovered Oscar's partially consumed remains 2 days later after he failed to make his scheduled check-in call. The remote location and difficult terrain had significantly delayed rescue efforts. Wildlife officials found clear evidence that the bear had been deliberately attracted by Oscar's bait stations and that its behavior escalated from food-focused investigation into a violent mauling driven by extreme food conditioning. Oscar's family requested the videos remain sealed from public viewing while issuing a statement emphasizing that their son's death resulted from an incomprehensibly reckless attempt to interact with wild predators for social media content. Investigation revealed that Oscar had intentionally created the exact conditions that wildlife experts warn against in grizzly country, but had gone far beyond normal safety violations by actively attempting to lure a bear into his tent. His death served as a stark reminder that wilderness predators are not pets or entertainment, and that no amount of social media fame is worth risking human life. The incident prompted new regulations requiring wilderness permits to include mandatory bear safety education and equipment checks. Park rangers began conducting more frequent patrols in remote areas, and warning signs were updated with graphic imagery showing the consequences of improper food storage and wildlife interaction attempts. Federal wildlife agencies used Oscar's case as a cautionary example in educational materials distributed to outdoor enthusiasts nationwide. The incident was later referenced in wildlife safety education materials addressing extreme risk-taking and improper food practices in bear country. While Oscar Mills paid the ultimate price for his catastrophically stupid decision in Montana's wilderness, hundreds of miles southeast in Tennessee's remote mountains, Lydia Shaw was seeking solitude in what seemed like the perfect camping spot, completely unaware of the deadly encounter that awaited her in the darkness. It was May 3, 2017, when Lydia Shaw arrived at a secluded hollow in the Tennessee backcountry, seeking refuge from a life that had spiraled beyond her control. The location was an unofficial pull-off area within federally managed forest land bordering the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, hidden from main trails by dense rhododendron thickets and a natural depression that concealed activity from park rangers. The site had been repeatedly used by transient campers over months, creating an established pattern of human presence that wildlife had learned to exploit. Lydia Shaw, a 34-year-old night shift worker at a local textile factory, had reached her breaking point. Her demanding supervisor had repeatedly denied time-off requests, while double shifts had left her physically and emotionally exhausted. The recent eviction had forced her to sleep in her car for weeks. Her co-worker Janet had warned against solo camping without experience, especially given recent reports of aggressive bear activity. But Lydia's desperation outweighed her caution. The unofficial and heavily impacted campsite showed disturbing signs of wildlife habituation that her inexperience prevented her from recognizing. Torn garbage bags and food containers littered the area, creating concentrated scent trails. Fresh bear scat containing plastic fragments indicated recent feeding activity, while claw marks on nearby trees revealed a persistent animal. The terrain's natural concealment had allowed this feeding pattern to develop without official detection, creating a dangerous association between human presence and food rewards. Lydia's lack of wilderness knowledge led to critical failures. She set up her cheap dollar store tent directly adjacent to the trash-strewn area, positioning herself within an established feeding zone. She kept canned goods and snacks inside her tent and ate her evening meal in her sleeping area, concentrating food odors around her vulnerable position. The warm May evening had left her tent flaps partially open for ventilation, allowing scents to disperse more widely through the hollow. Black bears are among North America's most adaptable large mammals. Food-conditioned bears lose their natural avoidance of people and develop bold, investigative behaviors. When bears learn to associate human presence with easy food access, they become increasingly aggressive in pursuing those rewards, sometimes escalating to dangerous encounters regardless of the individual bear's size. These behavioral changes can develop rapidly when food sources are consistently available without negative consequences. Shortly after 4 a.m., according to later timestamp analysis, Lydia sat outside her tent, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The unfamiliar sounds of the forest had kept her awake, every rustling leaf and snapping twig amplifying her anxiety. Investigators later reconstructed the bear's approach using track patterns, disturbed soil, and damage consistent with repeated animal movement through the area. The bear had been circling the area for nearly 20 minutes before Lydia became aware of its presence. Heavy footsteps crunched through debris as the animal systematically investigated the garbage-strewn feeding zone, moving with learned confidence. This was not a chance encounter. The bear's behavior demonstrated familiarity with the location and expectation of food rewards. When Lydia finally spotted the dark shape emerging from the tree line, the bear was already committed to investigating her campsite. The animal showed no fear of human presence, moving directly toward the concentrated food odors emanating from her tent area. Its bold approach indicated extensive food conditioning and loss of natural wariness. Panic seized her. Her co-workers' warnings about aggressive bears flooded her mind. In her terror and inexperience, Lydia made the fatal decision to scramble into her tent, frantically zipping the entrance closed behind her. She pressed herself against the far wall, convinced that being hidden from view would provide protection. The tent felt like sanctuary, but she had unknowingly trapped herself in a confined space with no escape route. She grabbed her old flip phone, fumbling with it in silence, but her hands shook too violently to complete a call. Through the thin fabric walls, she could track the bear's continued approach, the heavy footsteps growing closer, the snuffling breaths as it homed in on the food scents. The concentrated odors from inside her tent had already determined the outcome. The bear's powerful sense of smell led it directly to her location, where it began investigating the fabric barrier. Lydia held her breath as the animal's footsteps stopped right outside, its heavy breathing audible just inches away. The tent wall suddenly pressed inward as the bear's weight leaned against it. Sharp claws began probing the material, testing for entry points. Lydia remained frozen, hoping silence might prevent discovery, unaware that scent, not movement or sound, was guiding the bear's behavior. The cheap dollar store tent offered no resistance. The bear's claws punctured and tore through the material in seconds, ripping through multiple sections simultaneously. What Lydia had believed was protective shelter became a confined trap. The sound of tearing fabric filled the small space as the bear's massive head thrust through the torn opening. Lydia's paralysis shattered. She screamed and kicked, thrashing violently as she tried to scramble toward the opposite side of the tent, but there was nowhere to go. The bear seized her lower leg with crushing force, its jaws clamping down and causing immediate catastrophic injury. Still partially trapped in her sleeping bag, Lydia was dragged from the destroyed tent. The bear pulled her dozens of feet through dense undergrowth to a secluded area in the rhododendron thicket, where the attack continued with fatal consequences. Discovery came 18 hours later, when a ranger investigating an abandoned vehicle found Lydia's campsite. The tent's shredded remains told the story. The entrance had been zipped closed from the inside, and the tears came from the bear ripping through the walls to reach its target. Investigation revealed evidence suggesting repeated incidents involving food-conditioned bear behavior in the area over previous months. Wildlife officials determined that continued human food rewards, without negative consequences, had created dangerous behavioral patterns. DNA analysis and other forensic evidence supported the conclusion of bear involvement, though the specific individual animal was never definitively identified. Lydia's death prompted immediate area closure and enhanced enforcement against illegal camping. The incident highlighted deadly consequences of food conditioning in black bears and dangers created by illegal dumping in concealed locations. Most critically, it demonstrated that tents offer zero protection from determined wildlife. They shelter from weather, not predators. By the time Lydia recognized the approaching bear, the animal was already committed to investigating the food-scented area, leaving few viable options. Wildlife experts emphasized that the appropriate action would have been to make herself appear large, make noise, and slowly back away to her vehicle while the bear was still at a distance. The timing of her response proved as crucial as the response itself. By the time she recognized the threat, the food-conditioned bear was already committed to investigating her campsite, making safe retreat nearly impossible. Regional conservation groups cited Lydia's death as evidence for improved wildlife management in areas where human activity has altered natural bear behavior. Her family briefly explored legal options, though liability claims involving wild animal attacks on public land rarely succeed. While Lydia Shaw became a victim of human-modified predator behavior in Tennessee's mountains, far to the west in Wyoming's pristine backcountry, Nolan Ross was preparing for what should have been a peaceful camping experience, completely unaware of the deadly encounter that awaited in the wilderness. It was July 19, 2018, when Nolan Ross and his two young children arrived at a permitted backcountry campsite in Wyoming's Absaroka Range, seeking connection and healing through nature's embrace. Their destination lay along a pristine mountain corridor where crystal-clear streams carved through ancient granite formations, surrounded by dense forests of lodgepole pine and aspen groves that had remained unchanged for centuries. The campsite sat positioned near a natural game trail that wildlife had used for generations to access water sources, though this critical detail remained hidden beneath the area's deceptive tranquility and seemingly perfect camping conditions. Nolan Ross, a 31-year-old auto mechanic and Iraq War veteran, had discovered that wilderness experiences helped him process trauma and reconnect with what truly mattered in life. His quiet, protective nature made him a devoted single father to 8-year-old Emma, whose curious observations about nature brought him joy, and 6-year-old Jake, whose boundless energy reminded him daily why survival had been worth the struggle. This annual camping tradition had become essential therapy, with his counselor encouraging outdoor activities and family bonding time as a way to build positive memories with his children while finding peace away from modern life's chaos. The decision to venture into remote backcountry areas was Nolan's own choice, driven by his belief that deeper wilderness experiences offered the most profound healing and connection with his children. The family had obtained a backcountry permit at the trailhead, where posted notices outlined proper food storage protocols and wildlife wildlife safety measures that Nolan followed carefully during their setup process. His military training had instilled habits of situational awareness that served him well in the backcountry, though the peaceful setting and his children's excitement gradually lowered his guard as evening approached. They had followed standard food storage recommendations, using approved bear-resistant containers positioned away from their sleeping area. However, their campsite selection contained a fatal flaw that even experienced outdoors people might have missed. The level ground they had chosen for their tent sat directly on an established wildlife corridor connecting dense forest cover to the creek's water source. Subtle signs, faint game trails, compressed vegetation, and disturbed soil suggested regular wildlife movement near their tent location. As darkness fell, the sounds of the wilderness seemed peaceful and natural, masking the approach of danger that would transform their healing journey into an unimaginable tragedy. The area's ecosystem supported a diverse population of black bears that had learned to exploit every available food source during their constant preparation for winter hibernation. While black bear attacks on humans are rare, those that do occur are more likely than grizzly attacks to be predatory in nature, particularly when involving large, food-conditioned males that have lost their natural fear of people. Large adult males can exceed 300 pounds and possess problem-solving abilities that allow them to overcome basic deterrents when strongly food-motivated. Investigators later determined that a large male black bear approached the campsite along a nearby game trail shortly after dawn. Based on tracks and disturbed vegetation, the 300-pound animal showed no hesitation as it investigated their camp, systematically checking for food sources with the methodical behavior of a predator that had learned to associate human presence with feeding opportunities. Its bold approach and lack of natural wariness indicated dangerous food conditioning that had eliminated its instinctive fear of people through repeated successful encounters. The bear's attention focused on the tent area, where multiple attractants had accumulated despite careful cleanup efforts. Residual cooking odors from dinner preparation, traces of toothpaste from evening hygiene routines, and microscopic food particles from a minor spill during meal preparation had created a scent trail that triggered the bear's learned feeding response. While food was properly stored, residual cooking odors and the campsite's location along a natural wildlife corridor likely contributed to the bear's approach. The bear pressed its nose against the tent fabric, sniffing audibly before raking the material with a claw, tearing through the nylon as it searched for the source of the enticing odors. Nolan awakened to the sound of fabric tearing and immediately recognized the deadly situation developing outside their shelter. His military training kicked in as he assessed the threat and formulated a response designed to protect his sleeping children. Believing the animal might retreat if confronted, Nolan shouted and attempted to make himself appear larger before exiting the tent to draw the bear's attention away from his children. The bear initially paused at the confrontation, backing away several steps as Nolan's aggressive posturing triggered some residual wariness. For a brief moment, it seemed the deterrent might work as the animal hesitated at the tent's entrance. However, the bear's food conditioning quickly overcame its caution, and within seconds its behavior shifted from investigative to predatory. The bear lunged forward, knocking Nolan to the ground while biting and clawing at his upper body with devastating force. With terrifying strength, the bear dragged Nolan approximately 40 feet away from the tent, pulling him into dense undergrowth where it could feed without interference. The dragging process caused additional trauma as his body was pulled over rocks and fallen logs, creating multiple lacerations and internal injuries that accelerated blood loss and compounded the severity of his condition. Once in the cover of the forest, the bear's predatory instincts took complete control. It delivered multiple devastating bites to Nolan's head and neck area, its powerful jaws crushing bone and tearing through major blood vessels, inflicting catastrophic injuries within seconds. Death likely occurred within minutes due to massive blood loss and catastrophic trauma, but the bear's feeding behavior was interrupted as noise from the tent caused it to pause and eventually retreat into the surrounding forest. The children remained silent and concealed inside the tent for an extended period, their shock and terror rendering them motionless, as Nolan had previously instructed them to do if they ever encountered dangerous wildlife. Emma and Jacob Mike followed their father's emergency protocols exactly, staying quiet and hidden until daylight, and prolonged stillness convinced them it was safe to emerge. Emma's quick thinking in activating the emergency beacon, which Nolan had clipped to the tent's interior wall within easy reach of the children, initiated a rescue response, with teams reaching the remote location approximately 6 hours later due to challenging terrain and access limitations. Investigation revealed that the attacking bear had a history of aggressive encounters with campers in the region, with incidents involving food theft and property damage. Wildlife officials determined that the animal's behavior had escalated from nuisance activity to predatory attacks due to continued food conditioning and lack of negative consequences from previous encounters. The incident contributed to later updates in regional backcountry guidance, including stronger emphasis on carrying bear spray, improved campsite placement education, and enhanced education programs about predatory black bear behavior. His children were placed in the care of relatives who established a foundation promoting wilderness safety education in Nolan's memory. The bear was later tracked and destroyed after DNA evidence strongly supported its involvement in the fatal attack. The tragedy highlighted the complex challenges facing wildlife managers in balancing public access to wilderness areas with the reality of predator behavior in ecosystems where human activity has modified natural feeding patterns and territorial boundaries. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.